Hey everyone, how's it going? Injury here. Have you ever played this game? Because I sure have. In fact, I've been playing DayZ for over 11 years now, and until recently, I never really gave that fact a lot of thought, until Bohemia Interactive sent out an email celebrating 10 years of DayZ. Before I really get started talking about the history of DayZ, I want to emphasize that I'm not some super historian on this topic. This video can include factual inaccuracies, incorrect information, and not to mention my own personal opinion. Of course, I've tried my absolute best to ensure that this video contains correct information, but if there are any inaccuracies, please do let me know and I will make sure to correct them in the comments down below. Finally, I want you to know that everything I say comes from someone who has a lot of love for DayZ as one of the games I've played the most in my entire life. And not to mention, yes, I know this topic has been covered by other content creators, but this is my take and my experience with DayZ over the last 10 years. To really get the story of DayZ started, we have to go back to the year 2012 when the DayZ mod was first released to the public. I had just turned 15 years old at the time, and the DayZ mod was starting to absolutely rock the internet. And when I say it's rocking the internet, that might be the understatement of the century. The DayZ mod alone was responsible for Arma 2, which the DayZ mod is based on, selling millions of copies, quickly becoming one of the most played and purchased games on Steam in 2012 and 2013. In fact, I'd go as far as to say the DayZ mod rocked the internet like no other mod has done before, perhaps like no other game in this whole time period. Within the first 4 months of the alpha being playable in 2012, 1 million players had already played it. The sheer scale and popularity of the DayZ mod is actually really hard to encapsulate and recreate almost 12 years after the fact, but it was huge and its legacy is all around us. Now, I need to clarify one thing immediately when I've just said that it was the most sold game of 2012 and 2013. If you open your browser and you go to Google and you write most sold game of 2012 and 2013 on Steam, you'll find a bunch of lists with a suspicious lack of Arma 2 or Arma 2 Operation Arrowhead. Why? Well, that's because most of these top lists are based on games that were released in 2013 or 2012. Arma 2 being released in 2009 and Operation Arrowhead released in 2010, so these games are not going to be on those lists. So it's really hard to find exact sales numbers as those aren't public, but I and many others can reliably witness to the fact that Operation Arrowhead sat on the top selling lists on Steam for a very, very long time. Now, to a lot of the younger audience watching this, you might not really have a great deal of grasp and depth of an understanding of what the gaming industry and the internet was like in the 2012 to the 2015 era. And I'm not going to go into a whole great deal of depth here, but I think an important note to keep in mind is that some of the largest gaming categories we have today, like the infamous battle royales, the hardcore survival games, extract shooters, and many more, stem from DayZ and Arma, or at least got a massive popularity boost from the success of DayZ and made creating games in this category a safe bet, opening up the gaming industry's eyes to the possibilities in this gaming category. Now, if you never played the DayZ mod in its height, 10 years ago at this point, you might really be confused about what I'm talking about. How can DayZ, a zombie survival game or a zombie survival mod, be the reason for skyrocketing several gaming categories from niche to mainstream? How can you argue that DayZ in some ways spawned battle royales, extract shooter, and survival games and other similar beloved games that we have today? And the answer is quite simple. Before DayZ in 2012, there simply wasn't a similar game that would let players loose in this massive world to explore, fight in PvP or PvE environments with the risk to lose it all combined with survival elements. And just to be clear here, I'm not saying DayZ alone created survival games, extract shooters, or battle royales alone, but it's certainly a large reason as to why these gaming categories became so popular to begin with. Now, if we're looking at survival games before the year of 2012, not a whole lot was being created. Most of the popular survival games we know today come from the aftermath of the success of the DayZ mod in the time period of 2013 through 2015. Games like Subnautica, Don't Starve, Rust, The Forest, and many, many, many more come from the aftermath of the popularity that DayZ was able to create. And again, I'm not saying DayZ created these games or the survival games category. I'm simply saying it left a massive mark on the gaming industry and helped more game creators pick up and became willing to invest in the survival games category. But injury, you might say. DayZ doesn't really have as strong of survival elements as many other survival games I've played. There's just some simple crafting, dodging zombies and players, along with scavenging for food and water. How can you say that DayZ is such a pioneering survival game when all the games that came after it clearly had much more hardcore survival mechanics? And that is a very good question, and ones that lead me perfectly into my next segment. You see, DayZ is a mod for Arma 2. You hopefully already knew this. But the DayZ mod also had its own subset of mods. And these mods are one of the many reasons why the DayZ standalone wouldn't have such a great time in the 2014 to the 2018 period. I'll get back to that a little later. The thing is, the DayZ mod was fun. It was an amazing experience. But soon people realized they wanted to create their own kind of DayZ experience. Some people wanted more action, some people wanted more hardcore survival mechanics, some people wanted new maps, and many other things, which created their own sub-communities with hundreds and thousands of players. DayZ Epoch being one of the most popular, along with PlayerUnknown's Battle Royale mod for DayZ, which I'll get back to later. Other worthy mentions are, of course, DayZ Linger, DayZ Origins, DayZ Overwatch, DayZ Tavania, Namalsk, and many more. Now, most of these mods include massive frameworks for things like base building, survival mechanics, changed loot drop rates. Other mods were focused on vehicles and would import the full vehicle catalog from Arma 2 Operation Arrowhead, and so full tank-on-tank battles were suddenly a possibility, more weapons, and lots of other changes. Now, this is all great stuff, I can hear you say. So where are you going with this exactly? And if it's not clear, we've now got several vastly different DayZ experiences under the one and same game. And this is something that's going to haunt DayZ for a very long time, perhaps up to this very day. You see, the popularity of the DayZ mod would eventually lead to the DayZ mod being developed as its own standalone games by the guys that own Arma 2, which is Bohemia Interactive. So when the DayZ standalone was first released in 2013, to many people's surprise, it wasn't like the DayZ experience they were used to, and certainly not the one they wanted. The game didn't rely on many of the old assets from Arma 2. There were no tanks, almost no vehicles, and it was somehow a more buggy experience than Arma DayZ mod. And perhaps more importantly, the gameplay was significantly slowed down. A big emphasis was placed on the survival mechanics, things like stamina, water poisoning, weight, lower weapon spawn rates, less vehicles, and many more changes were made to the DayZ standalone over time, which became a highly contrasting product to the DayZ mod that many people were used to, where the majority of players were playing modded, vastly different DayZ experiences with vehicles and helicopters, more weapons, and so forth.
What the hell is even that?
Well, there's nothing to do. At this point, I'd expect, we'd be gearing up. We'd be heading over to a base that we've set up to store our equipment and gold or whatever we've stolen. And then we'd be heading off to do one of the NPC missions or some patrol or something like that that spawn randomly. There's nothing to do. Right now, you're making potatoes grow.
You are the developer of Arma 2, and you're looking to make the official DayZ standalone. The DayZ. The one that's going to see all of the development and marketing focus at the expense of the other variations. Which of these mods from the DayZ mod era, bearing in mind that some of their core mechanics very much conflict with each other, do you pick? Mods that have gone through successive changes over many iterations to adapt a specific audience taste on their own servers, yet can still trace their ideas back to the same man who, by the by, now works for you. You hired him. So guess which way the shit is flinging if they perceive your answer as the wrong one. And to a varying degree, all of whom consider the way that they like to play DayZ the real DayZ. Or at the very least, consider the other types boring. Oh, and one last thing, they're paying you for it. They're going to buy DayZ when you put it on Steam Early Access. Oh my god, it's a shit show. Oh, it's a... Oh man. Oh my god. Oh man.
The PvP encounters, the base rating, the mods that introduced battle royales like PlayerUnknown wasn't taken into consideration, and as a result, a large portion of the DayZ standalone's player count would bleed back into the old game for a long time, and as competing companies started to release their own survival games later, like the battle royales that we've talked about, DayZ got to a point where it barely had any players. Now this might seem really strange to talk about today with how successful DayZ is right now, but at one point in July of 2018, the DayZ standalone had less than 1,800 active players in a month. Things were not looking good for DayZ. Meanwhile, Bohemia was of course continuing to develop DayZ with its hardcore survival mechanics and features that most people quite frankly didn't want, and it certainly did not help DayZ's popularity that PUBG got released in this time period. In fact, just a few months after PUBG's release, DayZ hit its lowest ever average player count since release, and in August of 2018, it hit just 1,500 average players. Now, of course, DayZ isn't a battle royale, and it never should have been. I just think it really puts stuff into perspective when you think about how this all really came from DayZ and what DayZ perhaps could have looked like if the game had been shaped a little differently in its early years, and what kind of other products it potentially could have spawned. Now, if you didn't play the DayZ mod back in its height, I don't blame you, it's a very long time ago, but a very popular mod, which I've already mentioned, was created called the Battle Royale mod, which of course would go on to perhaps become the most successful mod in the history of DayZ. Now, this Battle Royale mod was created by a fella you might have heard of, Player Unknown, or as his real name is, Brendan Green. Player Unknown would go on to recreate the Battle Royale mod in Arma 3 in 2014 and later moved to Korea to recreate PUBG, which of course sold 20 million copies in its very first year of release. And with the boom of the Battle Royales, we also of course got your Fortnites, your Call of Duty Warzones, and the uncountable other Battle Royale variants we have today. And I just think it's very interesting how in this some way, directly or indirectly, came from DayZ. As a little sidetrack, I think it's kind of amazing how DayZ, instead of, creating a product that people wanted with some more fast-paced combat like we saw in the DayZ mods, like DayZ Epoch, with vehicles, helicopters, and higher spawn rates of guns and zombies, they would just keep pushing down this route of solely focusing on the hardcore survival mechanics and developing the game in a direction that, quite frankly, most people didn't want. And this, in my opinion, led a whole industry down the road of creating survival games in the wake of DayZ, as it was just, quite frankly, clear they were unsuccessful in capturing a lot of the old player base it had, which at that point had branched out with extremely different player experiences. Like we talked about, PUBG and the Battle Royales would branch out and create their gig with the fast-paced, while extract shooters would more focus on the technical aspects of guns and shooting in safe houses without vehicles. And finally, of course, the other zombie survival games would try, albeit with varying success, try to replicate DayZ. So what happened to DayZ after 2017, 2018, and the success of Battle Royales and competitor products like Rust's, Ark Survival Evolved, and many, many others? Firstly, the game was finally put on the Steam Workshop in late 2018, which would greatly revive the DayZ community, allowing people to mod the game at last. And when I say greatly, I mean I'm talking absolutely rebooting the whole game from a dead-like sleep state as it was at the time and really skyrocketing it back into orbit. Finally, after 4 years of development, people could once again start to mod and shape DayZ into the experience they actually wanted and step away from the vanilla DayZ experience that, quite frankly, nobody has ever really been that interested in, as is evidenced by the player numbers. Eventually, DayZ would also start to release updates with vehicle contents, and with a plethora of mods being released, more and more people started getting drawn back into the game, and as the stability of the mods increased, the experience in the game could be shaped even further into what people really, really wanted. More custom servers started filling up, and the community was starting to draw back in old players into the game, and in the period after the game was released to Steam Workshop in December of 2018, DayZ had an explosive growth of players from the low 24,000 peak in 2019 to 40,000 players in 2020 and 45,000 in 2021, 57,000 in 2022, 68,000 in 2023, and to its record month, January of 2024, with an amazing 73,336 players at its peak. So that leaves us at the modern day. DayZ is absolutely blooming. It's more played than it's ever been, so why am I sounding like such a douche critiquing it when the game is healthy and well? Well, if it wasn't obvious this whole time since the game was first released, I believe Bohemia has mismanaged the development of DayZ. Now, to be clear, I'm not dismissing some of the massive issues that DayZ development and its team has had. The changing of DayZ's engine, losing critical members of the development team, and other big events are not to be glossed over. Besides, it's not like I could have done any damn better myself, but that doesn't excuse what I believe was for years intentional misdirection from the DayZ product that most people wanted to play. Bohemia and the development team, quite frankly, had and still seems to have a completely different vision of what DayZ should be based on their continuous development actions. The active choice that Bohemia made to push DayZ into more of a hardcore survival game ruined this game's player base for years, and they still continue to push the game in this direction to this very day. Game mechanics like the new stamina system that's based on weight, the inertia system, food poisoning, bloodied hands, etc. are all evidence of this. Most of these mechanics are literally modded out of the majority of the servers played by the DayZ community, which is again evident by the player numbers. If everyone loved playing vanilla DayZ, Why was the game dying back in 2018, and the second mod support came out, it boomed back into popularity? Don't get me wrong here. Having mods is fantastic, and obviously you can't all add them into the product itself, but it really says something about a game when most of the community is literally modding out features from the game to make it into the experience they truly want. As a final note of my critique, I want to mention that it's really easy to put on rose-tinted glasses based on what we're seeing right now. DayZ is successful right now, but it wasn't always like that. It was a shit show compared to many other gaming failures, and I just believe that it didn't really have to be that way. But it was chosen as a path for the game by the studio behind it. Like, there was really a time when the competition was walking all over DayZ, when the reviews were mostly negative, and when most importantly, there were no mods. Either way, DayZ is blooming right now, and it's very healthy no matter what you say about its past, and really no matter how you feel about the game. And I want to be very clear that I'm not unnecessarily trying to critique DayZ and what DayZ is, and I'm not saying you shouldn't enjoy it. I absolutely love DayZ. It's one of my most played games, and a game I have very, very fond memories with. I've met, played with, and gained so many friends through DayZ. Friends who would eventually drift away to becoming acquaintances, friends that are no longer with us, and friend groups that simply fell apart. I'm a DayZ fan. I've released DayZ videos on and off since 2014, some of which are kind of shit. I absolutely love what DayZ is, but I believe that DayZ could have been more successful earlier, and it could have been even more successful to this day if the game had released more stable frameworks for vehicles and helicopters, tanks, and more. And I think it's noteworthy that, to most of us, for such a successful game, we're by and large playing an extremely modded experience that takes away so much of the effort that was put into the game to begin with. But no matter, DayZ managed to turn their sinking ship into a successful game, which I may remind you, many other studios have failed to do so. Lest I mention the day before Infestation Survivor Stories or Metal Gear Survive. Games that in many ways, if not necessarily trying to copy DayZ, certainly played on the same format that was and is so successful. Alright, so that's pretty much my take and my take on history in DayZ. Now I would love to hear your take on DayZ. Do you agree with my take? Did I miss something really important, or do you have any other feedback? I do read every single comment. I'm not that massive of a YouTuber, and I'd love to hear what you all have to say on this pretty complicated topic. And again, sorry if there were any mistakes, I'll make sure to correct them if there were any. I do also stream on Twitch, so if you want to catch me live in some gaming or just hang out, links to that will be down below. And of course, I have to say many thanks to everybody who's subscribed to me here on YouTube. We're so close to hitting 2,000 subscribers, which would be really, really great. So if you enjoyed this video, please do consider giving it a like or commenting down below. I'm going to say that just like every other YouTuber on this platform, but it does really make a difference. I'm not that big a YouTuber, like I said, so all the help is greatly appreciated. So with that being said, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care, and bye-bye.